All right, we're just looking at live pictures here. John Kerry, Secretary of State, and Foreign Minister Zarif, among others, are getting ready to. I think there's going to be a press conference. We're expecting some sort of words, but the president is going to be speaking in the next 20 minutes, Joe, and I believe he will come first, talking about the parameters of this deal and also the historic nature of this moment.
The historic nature of this moment, Mika, that John Kerry chased with abandon, some would say reckless abandon, for quite some time, but this is obviously a huge morning for former Senator John Kerry, now Secretary of State John Kerry, in a position that he's always wanted to be in, being Secretary of State, brokering a deal. Many people mocked him the second he became Secretary of State, jetting across the world, chasing a deal. It appears that he has caught one, and the question is whether he's going to be able to sell it along with Barack Obama to the rest of America. I can tell you, though, as we start getting statements coming from the United States Senate, here we have U.S. Senator Ben Sasse just issued a statement saying that Barack Obama and John Kerry have, quote, lit the fuse for a nuclear arms race. That actually is also a statement that could be coming out of Cairo or many other Sunni capitals across the Middle East.
That reckless abandon or intensity that John Kerry has shown over the past few months, adding to it, I think he has a broken leg, right, from a bike accident that he endured recently. The guy doesn't give up. Back with us from the White House, we have NBC News senior White House correspondent Chris Jansing. Chris, you have new information about what the president is expected to say in a matter of moments.
Yeah, he's going to spend about 15 minutes. This is when the sales job starts, right? So he has 15 minutes to lay out essentially what his case is to the American people, to Congress, and to the international community. He's been working on it this morning. Saw the lights go on in the residence maybe a little after 5:45 this morning. And again, his aides tell me it'll last about 15 minutes. First of all, he's going to thank everybody involved in this. There were many times, as you well know, that this deal looked like it was going to collapse. And when many of the players not only looked but admitted that they were completely exhausted, voices were raised, testy words were exchanged. Now they have this agreement. I think one of the things that's worth pointing out is that although the president will make a sort of a general overview, talk about he believes how this makes the world a safer place, he will thank the P5 partners, Britain, France, China, Germany, Russia, push the fact that this is an international agreement. The complexities of this 100 pages, including, I think, 5 addendums, are absolutely staggering. And our understanding is that one of the reasons that we didn't get this last night, that it was delayed, is because they were very concerned to be specific about the translation in these documents. They didn't want Iran to be able to come back and say, that's not exactly what we agreed to. So given the complexities of this, given the ability for sanctions to be snapped back on, the opposition in Congress and in the international community, while the White House certainly feels that they've reached a deal that they can sell, they also know that this is one that, as one senior official put it to me, Joe and Mika, we are years away from judging its success.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. We're going to just see what's going on here. This is in Vienna as they're getting ready to have a press conference. My understanding was the president was going to speak first, but I believe we have... I want to bring up the sound. We have Foreign Minister Zarif making some comments, and this may be a translator. I'm not sure, but we're going to dip in and listen. Take a listen.
Thanks to the constructive engagement of all parties and the dedication and ability of our teams, we have successfully concluded negotiations and resolved a dispute that lasted more than 10 years. Many people brought these difficult negotiations forward during the last decade, and we would like to thank them all, as we would like to thank the International Atomic Energy Agency for its critical contribution and close cooperation, as well as the Austrian government for the support and the hospitality. Thank you. We, the European Union High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy and the Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Iran, together with the foreign ministers of the People's Republic of China, France, Germany, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America, met here in Vienna following several months of intensive work at various levels and in different formats to negotiate the text of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action based on the key parameters agreed in Lausanne on the 2nd of April. We have today agreed on the final text of this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The E3, EU +3 and the Islamic Republic of Iran welcome this historic Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which will ensure that Iran's nuclear program will be exclusively peaceful and mark a fundamental shift in their approach to this issue. They anticipate that full implementation of this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action will positively contribute to regional and international peace and security.
You're listening to Federica Mogherini, the High Representative for the European Union, standing side by side with Foreign Minister Rouhani right now on the historic deal, Zarif, with Iran. And she's speaking right now about this. We are also standing by in a matter of 10 to 15 minutes. We'll be hearing from President Obama. But for now, we will continue to listen in.
Comprehensive lifting of all UN Security Council sanctions, as well as multilateral and national sanctions related to Iran's nuclear program, including steps on access in areas of trade, technology, finance, and energy. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action comprises of a main text and 5 technical annexes on nuclear, sanctions, civil nuclear energy cooperation, a joint commission, and implementation. These documents are detailed and specific. That is important because all sides wanted clarity so as to ensure the full and effective implementation of the agreement. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is a balanced deal that respects the interests of all sides. It is also complex, detailed, and technical. We cannot fully summarize the agreement now, but the full main text and all its annexes will be made public still today.
We are, Mika, obviously, we are listening to the summary of this deal, which is very interesting. There's a line in here that says the accord's going to be a political agreement and not a legally binding treaty. Obviously, there's legal significance to that. But to strike this deal, there were obviously a lot of gives on John Kerry's side, and the question is whether Congress is going to go along with this deal or not. I guess that's really the question of the moment.
The next maybe 25 to 30 minutes on Morning Joe will be so interesting. We're going to hear from the president, take his comments live. That will be followed by Senator Tom Cotton. So we'll be getting two very different points of view on this. First, though, from the president of the United States, who I think it's not an argument that this is a huge accomplishment on the diplomatic front.
Can I ask Joe a question?
Sure, go ahead, Harold.
Joe, if you were in the Senate, what would be the 1 or 2, 3, 4, 1 or 2 things you'd be looking for that would make you want to vote or against this deal? What would you advise senators? And more importantly, if you were a senator, what would you be thinking as this deal was presented and the president speaks in a few minutes?
Well, the most important thing, obviously, simplified to its barest terms. Ronald Reagan did it whenever there were talks about deals with the Soviet Union. You can trust, but you have to verify. And for most people going into this deal, and even the administration, the most important thing was verification anytime, any place. And that, in large part, is a necessity because you're dealing with a country that has been the epicenter of international terrorism since 1979. And so the inspections regime is absolutely critical. I would also be very concerned by the fact that the White House backed down on the demands that Iran dismantle its most advanced nuclear facilities and its nuclear program. The Iranians are going to be able to go back now and brag that they haven't had to dismantle anything. They've taken some things out and put it in storage, but according to the terms of this deal, nothing really of any significance is dismantled. So that would obviously be a great concern. Let me go to David Ignatius with that question as well. David, as you formulate your thoughts in the coming days and weeks and write your columns to your avid and faithful leaders, the leaders of not only this country but across the Middle East and the world. What are you going to be looking at? Let me frame Harold's question to you as a journalist and an opinion shaper. What parts of this deal are you going to be looking most closely at?
Joe, I'm going to start at the same place that you did. I'm going to look at the way in which Iranian compliance with this agreement will be inspected and verified. Iran says privately that it is prepared to accept the additional protocol, so-called, which allows IAEA inspectors to go to any facility in Iran where they have reason to suspect that prohibited activities are taking place. And there's a framework for how that will be done that's known as managed access. I want to look at the details of that. I want to look at precisely what the trigger is, how much debate and discussion there is before the inspectors are on the ground. Those details are really going to matter. I want to look at research and development. If through the course of this 10 to 15-year agreement, Iran rushes ahead with research and development, at the end they're going to be a much more powerful nuclear player than they are today. I'm going to look at how this agreement affects Iran's other activities in the region. I fear that it's going to have no effect at all, and many analysts say that the Iranians may even be more aggressive to show that they're not constrained by the new framework of the agreement. I'd sum up, Joe, by saying that President Obama is making what I'd call a cosmic bet, that after 10 years, Iran will be a different country and it will be less dangerous to the United States and Israel. And I want to know what evidence there is to think that cosmic bet is going to come out right for the United States, for Israel, for all of our friends.
David, what is the possibility that this deal launches a new arms race across the Middle East, regardless of what Iran does over the next 10 years? Do Sunni powers across the Middle East, do they have to have the confidence of Barack Obama and the good-heartedness of the Iranians? Of course they don't. It seems to me that they're going to be making decisions this morning based on how to protect themselves from a growing Shiite power. What happens there? What happens in Saudi Arabia? What happens in Egypt? What happens in Jordan?
Unfortunately, much of what happens in those countries will be masked from the U.S. The reason that President Obama held his Camp David summit with the leading Sunni Arab powers was precisely to deal with that issue. And he got statements on paper that made it sound like they're going to go along with this deal. We'll have to see. But the statements are there in principle. They say they're more worried about Iranian behavior than they are about the fact that they're a nuclear power.
All right, David Ignatius, thank you. We are following the breaking news this morning as we approach the top of the hour. A deal has been reached over Iran's nuclear program. Iran has pledged to make changes to its nuclear program in exchange for the easing of economic sanctions in an historic pact agreed with the United States and other world powers. Here are the details. According to Western diplomatic sources, Iran and 6 world powers have agreed to a deal that will limit Iran's nuclear production for 10 years. It will also curb their access to nuclear fuel and equipment for 15 years. Both are in return for billions of dollars in sanctions relief. The sanctions will not be lifted until Iran proves to the International Atomic Energy Agency that it has met its obligations under the terms of the deal. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has taken the first step, tweeting a photo of his vice president signing a roadmap plan with the head of the IAEA. Over the next 3 months, Iran will provide answers to the agency's questions. The agreement runs more than 80 pages and was struck after a painstaking review that stretched into the early hours of this morning. It still faces a vote in Congress, and that won't be easy, although it remains unclear whether the Republicans and some Democrats who object to the deal will actually be able to override its enactment. And that's the question I have for you, Joe, because we are waiting. In the next 2 minutes, President Obama is going to take to the podium, and we're going to take that live. But let's talk about what he confronts in Congress with this, because first of all, do they have the power to push back this deal? And what would be the biggest issues, do you think?
They certainly have the power to move public opinion to such a degree that it's going to make it very difficult for President Obama to continue to champion a bill that, say, 75% of Americans would oppose. I suspect, though, after 12 years of war, a war-weary nation might be more reluctant to take a hostile view, even to a country like Iran. But I want to follow up on what David Ignatius said, Mika. This is a president who has supported the concept of leading from behind, of being very cautious in foreign policy more times than not. There are some notable exceptions like Libya. But it is remarkable that a president that has been so cautious on the international stage because he was so fearful of repeating the mistakes of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney have seemed to tear a page out of George W. Bush's playbook by taking a, quote, cosmic gamble on a great unknown. And that is how this deal is going to impact the behavior of a country that has been the greatest sponsor of terrorism since 1979. Just like George W. Bush made a great bet in 2003 that he could bring peace to the Middle East by starting a war, and that ended disastrously. Here we are 12 years later with Barack Obama thinking he can bring Iran into the community of nations by making a cosmic gamble on a peace deal. We'll see how it goes.
Let's take President Obama.
Today, after 2 years of negotiations, the United States, together with our international partners, has achieved something that decades of animosity has not. A comprehensive long-term deal with Iran that will prevent it from obtaining a nuclear weapon. This deal demonstrates that American diplomacy can bring about real and meaningful change. Change that makes our country and the world safer and more secure. This deal is also in line with a tradition of American leadership. It's now more than 50 years since President Kennedy stood before the American people and said, "Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate." He was speaking then about the need for discussions between the United States and the Soviet Union, which led to efforts to restrict the spread of nuclear weapons. In those days, the risk was a catastrophic nuclear war between two superpowers. In our time, the risk is that nuclear weapons will spread to more and more countries, particularly in the Middle East, the most volatile region in our world. Today, because America negotiated from a position of strength and principle, we have stopped the spread of nuclear weapons in this region. Because of this deal, the international community will be able to verify that the Islamic Republic of Iran will not develop a nuclear weapon. This deal meets every single one of the bottom lines that we established when we achieved a framework earlier this spring. Every pathway to a nuclear weapon is cut off, and the inspection and transparency regime necessary to verify that objective will be put in place. Because of this deal, Iran will not produce the highly enriched uranium and weapons-grade plutonium that form the raw materials necessary for a nuclear bomb. Because of this deal, Iran will remove 2/3 of its installed centrifuges, the machines necessary to produce highly enriched uranium for a bomb, and store them under constant international supervision. Iran will not use its advanced centrifuges to produce enriched uranium for the next decade. Iran will also get rid of 98% of its stockpile of enriched uranium. To put that in perspective, Iran currently has a stockpile that could produce up to 10 nuclear weapons. Because of this deal, that stockpile will be reduced to a fraction of what would be required for a single weapon. This stockpile limitation will last for 15 years. Because of this deal, Iran will modify the core of its reactor in Iraq so that it will not produce weapons-grade plutonium. And it has agreed to ship the spent fuel from the reactor out of the country for the lifetime of the reactor. For at least the next 15 years, Iran will not build any new heavy water reactors. Because of this deal, we will, for the first time, be in a position to verify all of these commitments. That means this deal is not built on trust. It is built on verification. Inspectors will have 24/7 access to Iran's key nuclear facilities. Iran will have access to Iran's entire nuclear supply chain, its uranium mines and mills, its conversion facility, and its centrifuge manufacturing and storage facilities. This ensures that Iran will not be able to divert materials from known facilities to covert ones. Some of these transparency measures will be in place for 25 years. Because of this deal, inspectors will also be able to access any suspicious location. Put simply, the organization responsible for the inspections, the IAEA, will have access where necessary, when necessary. That arrangement is permanent. And the IAEA has also reached an agreement with Iran to get access that it needs to complete its investigation into the possible military dimensions of Iran's past nuclear research. Finally, Iran is permanently prohibited from pursuing a nuclear weapon under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which provided the basis for the international community's efforts to apply pressure on Iran. As Iran takes steps to implement this deal, it will receive relief from the sanctions that we put in place because of Iran's nuclear program, both America's own sanctions and sanctions imposed by the United Nations Security Council. This relief will be phased in. Iran must complete key nuclear steps before it begins to receive new sanctions relief. And over the course of the next decade, Iran must abide by the deal before additional sanctions are lifted, including 5 years for restrictions related to arms and 8 years for restrictions related to ballistic missiles. All of this will be memorialized and endorsed in a new United Nations Security Council resolution. And if Iran violates the deal, all these sanctions will snap back into place. So there's a very clear incentive for Iran to follow through, and there are very real consequences for a violation. That's the deal. It has the full backing of the international community. Congress will now have an opportunity to review the details, and my administration stands ready to provide extensive briefings on how this will move forward. As the American people and Congress review the deal, it will be important to consider the alternative. Consider what happens in a world without this deal. Without this deal, there is no scenario where the world joins us in sanctioning Iran until it completely dismantles its nuclear program. Nothing we know about the Iranian government suggests that it would simply capitulate under that kind of pressure. And the world would not support an effort to permanently sanction Iran into submission. We put sanctions in place to get a diplomatic resolution, and that is what we have done. Without this deal, there would be no agreed-upon limitations for the Iranian nuclear program. Iran could produce, operate, and test more and more centrifuges. Iran could fuel a reactor capable of producing plutonium for a bomb, and we would not have any of the inspections that allow us to detect a covert nuclear weapons program. In other words, no deal means no lasting constraints on Iran's nuclear program. Such a scenario would make it more likely that other countries in the region would feel compelled to pursue their own nuclear programs, threatening a nuclear arms race in the most volatile region of the world. It would also present the United States with fewer and less effective options to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. I've been President and Commander-in-Chief for over 6 years now. Time and again, I have faced decisions about whether or not to use military force. It's the gravest decision that any president has to make. Many times, in multiple countries, I have decided to use force. And I will never hesitate to do so when it is in our national security interest. I strongly believe that our national security interest now depends upon preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, which means that without a diplomatic resolution, either I or a future U.S. president would face a decision about whether or not to allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon or whether to use our military to stop it. Put simply, no deal means a greater chance of more war in the Middle East. Moreover, we give nothing up by testing whether or not this problem can be solved peacefully. If, in a worst-case scenario, Iran violates the deal, the same options that are available to me today will be available to any U.S. president in the future. And I have no doubt that 10 or 15 years from now, the person who holds this office will be in a far stronger position, with Iran further away from a weapon, and with the inspections and transparency that allow us to monitor the Iranian program. For this reason, I believe it would be irresponsible to walk away from this deal. But on such a tough issue, it is important that the American people and their representatives in Congress get a full opportunity to review the deal. After all, the details matter. And we've had some of the finest nuclear scientists in the world working through those details. And we're dealing with a country, Iran, that has been a sworn adversary of the United States for over 35 years. So I welcome a robust debate in Congress on this issue, and I welcome scrutiny of the details of this agreement. But I will remind Congress that you don't make deals like this with your friends. We negotiated arms control agreements with the Soviet Union when that nation was committed to our destruction, and those agreements ultimately made us safer. I am confident that this deal will meet the national security interests of the United States and our allies. So I will veto any legislation that prevents the successful implementation of this deal. We do not have to accept an inevitable spiral into conflict, and we certainly shouldn't seek it. And precisely because the stakes are so high, this is not the time for politics or posturing. Tough talk from Washington does not solve problems. Hard-nosed diplomacy, leadership that has united the world's major powers, offers a more effective way to verify that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. Now, that doesn't mean that this deal will resolve all of our differences with Iran. We share the concerns expressed by many of our friends in the Middle East, including Israel and the Gulf states, about Iran's support for terrorism and its use of proxies to destabilize the region. But that is precisely why we are taking this step. Because an Iran armed with a nuclear weapon would be far more destabilizing and far more dangerous to our friends and to the world. Meanwhile, we will maintain our own sanctions related to Iran's support for terrorism, its ballistic missile program, and its human rights violations. We will continue our unprecedented efforts to strengthen Israel's security, efforts that go beyond what any American administration has done before. And we will continue the work we began at Camp David to elevate our partnership with the Gulf states to strengthen their capabilities to counter threats from Iran or terrorist groups like ISIL. However, I believe that we must continue to test whether or not this region, which has known so much suffering, so much bloodshed, can move in a different direction. Time and again, I have made clear to the Iranian people that we will always be open to engagement on the basis of mutual interests and mutual respect. Our differences are real, and the difficult history between our nations cannot be ignored. But it is possible to change. The path of violence and rigid ideology, a foreign policy based on threats to attack your neighbors or eradicate Israel, that's a dead end. A different path, one of tolerance and peaceful resolution of conflict, leads to more integration into the global economy, more engagement with the international community, and the ability of the Iranian people to prosper and thrive. This deal offers an opportunity to move in a new direction. We should seize it. We have come a long way to reach this point. Decades of an Iranian nuclear program, many years of sanctions, and many months of intense negotiation. Today I want to thank the members of Congress from both parties who helped us put in place the sanctions that have proven so effective, as well as the other countries who joined us in that effort. I want to thank our negotiating partners, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, China, as well as the European Union, for our unity in this effort, which showed that the world can do remarkable things when we share a vision of peacefully addressing conflicts. We showed what we can do when we do not split apart. And finally, I want to thank the American negotiating team. We had a team of experts working for several weeks straight on this, including our Secretary of Energy, Ernie Moniz. And I want to particularly thank John Kerry, our Secretary of State, who began his service to this country more than 4 decades ago when he put on our uniform and went off to war. He's now making this country safer through his commitment to strong, principled American diplomacy. History shows that America must lead not just with our might, but with our principles. It shows we are stronger not when we are alone, but when we bring the world together. Today's announcement marks one more chapter in this pursuit of a safer and more helpful, more hopeful world. Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
You've been watching President Obama with Vice President Biden by his side, announcing to the nation and the world the historic deal cut with Iran. And actually, at exactly the same moment, Prime Minister Rouhani has been doing the same thing before the cameras in his country. The president making the case for this deal, making definitive statements about it. This is real and meaningful change, he says. America negotiated from a position of strength. He said Iran will not be able to develop a nuclear weapon. He also says that this deal meets every goal that they had set out for in the spring, and that every pathway for a nuclear weapon will be cut off. Also, Joe, the parameters, he says, for the next 15 years, Iran will not be able to build any heavy reactors. Inspectors will have 24/7 access to key nuclear facilities, access to manufacturing sites and storage facilities, and the IAEA will get access to past nuclear research as well. And then he said very clearly and very sharply that if Iran violates any part of this deal, any small part of this deal, that all the sanctions will snap back into place. He says it would be irresponsible to walk away from this deal, and that we should seize the opportunity to move in a positive direction, Joe.
You know, there was also a part of the speech where it got very specific, where 98% of the Iranian stockpile of enriched uranium is going to be destroyed. He said right now they have enough enriched uranium to build 10 nuclear weapons, and it's going to be reduced to 2% for 15 years, and that would be the fraction of an amount used to build even one nuclear device. Also, a very fascinating part of this speech is when he talked about what the world would look like without this deal, that the United States would have to go it alone on the issue of sanctions, that there would be absolutely no limitations on Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon, that there would be no inspections, the like of which the president is saying the international community is going to have, and no lasting constraints on the development of that program. And the president also said, by entering into this deal, we have nothing to lose. He also put it down to hard-nosed negotiations instead of just tough talk from Washington. And so we have an awful lot to digest, not only here, but also for members of Congress and the country to digest. And why don't we start this process by bringing in the most vocal opponent to the president's nuclear negotiations, a freshman Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas. Senator, you obviously heard the president's speech. What's your initial reaction?
Joe, this proposed deal is a terrible, dangerous mistake that's going to pave the path for Iran to get a nuclear weapon, while also giving them tens of billions of dollars of sanctions relief, even lifting the arms embargo at a time when they're destabilizing the entire Middle East. The American people are going to repudiate this deal, and I believe Congress will kill the deal.
What do you think about it sounds from what the president said today that we were going to be able, the international community would be able to verify that Iran was sticking to the deal with a very aggressive inspections regime. Does this satisfy your concerns about inspections?
No, Joe, of course not. If you look at the text of the deal, Iran will have weeks to delay. They'll be able to decide which sites that we inspect. But more fundamentally, if they wanted to end their nuclear program and rejoin the civilized world, they could simply grant us access. They don't. They are an outlaw, terrorist-sponsoring, anti-American regime. They have the blood of hundreds of American soldiers on their hands who they killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And today, we are giving sanctions relief to organizations like the Revolutionary Guard Corps and men like Qasem Soleimani, the general that leads that corps, who are responsible for killing American soldiers.
Okay, Senator,
What about, go ahead, Mika.
I'm just wondering, what does 24/7 access to nuclear facilities mean?
Well, after 24 days of negotiating and Iran complaining, after they've been able to scrub their sites, then maybe we will get access. But senior administration officials are already saying on background that anytime, anywhere inspections, which is the standard this president set, will not be met, that it was never realistic to begin with.
It seems you're very quick to criticize the deal, and it seems like you're reading a different deal, with all due respect.
Well, it's easy to criticize the deal using the president's own words. When we started down this path, he said the goal was to dismantle Iran's nuclear program. This leaves their nuclear program entirely intact. They can get a nuclear weapon if they violate the deal, as they've done with every agreement in the past, or they can get a nuclear weapon if they follow the deal in a mere 10 to 15 years. The president himself has admitted that. That's why this deal is so dangerous.
Senator, using the president's own words then, he said, quote, this deal is built on verification, and, quote, the IAEA would have access where necessary, when necessary, and that access is permanent. Is the president of the United States lying to us, or has he been misled?
I will say that the words when necessary, where necessary are very different from any time, anywhere, and it gives Iran a say in where those inspectors
that's a semantic trick. How is it different? Where necessary, when necessary?
Anytime, anywhere means the inspectors and anyone from the international community can go anywhere they choose in Iran. When necessary, where necessary reflects the actual text of the deal, which gives Iran a say in where those inspectors go. But again, the more fundamental point is the nature of Iran's regime. If they wanted to rejoin the civilized world, they would open up all their facilities. That's what South Africa did when they wanted to eliminate their nuclear weapons program.
It's what Libya did.
They didn't have endless debates.
Tom Cotton, I want to thank you, Senator, for being with us. Obviously, this conversation is going to continue, but we really appreciate you coming on. We have Secretary of State John Kerry speaking there, and we need to take that. But thank you so much for being with us. We'll talk to you very soon. Let's go, Mika, right now to Secretary of State Kerry.
Implemented will bring insight and accountability to Iran's nuclear program, not for a small number of years, but for the lifetime of that program. This is the good deal that we have sought. Believe me, had we been willing to settle for a lesser deal, we would have finished this negotiation a long time ago. But we were not. All of us, not just the United States, but France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Russia, China, and the EU, we're determined to get this right. And so we have been patient, and I believe our persistence has paid off. A few months ago in Lausanne, we and our international partners joined Iran in announcing a series of parameters to serve as the contours of a potential deal. Experts and commentators were in fact surprised by all that we had achieved at that point. After 3 more months of long days and late nights, I'm pleased to tell you that we have stayed true to those contours, and we have now finally carved in the details. Now, I want to be very clear. The parameters that we announced in Lausanne not only remain intact and form the backbone of the agreement that we reached today, but through the detail, they have been amplified in ways that make this agreement even stronger. That includes the sizable reduction of Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium and the number of centrifuges that it operates. It also guarantees that Iran's breakout time, the time it would take for Iran to speed up its enrichment and produce enough fissile material for just one nuclear weapon, that time will increase to at least 1 year for a period of at least 10 years. And contrary to the assertions of some, this agreement has no sunset. It doesn't terminate. It will be implemented in phases, beginning within 90 days of the UN Security Council endorsing the deal, and some of the provisions are in place for 10 years, others for 15 years, others for 25 years. And certain provisions, including many of the transparency measures and prohibitions on nuclear work, will stay in place permanently. But most importantly, this agreement addresses Iran's potential pathways to fissile material for a bomb exactly as we said it would, with appropriate limitations and transparency in order to assure the world of the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. Now let me explain exactly how it will accomplish that goal. To start, the participants have agreed Iran will not produce or acquire either highly enriched uranium or weapons-grade plutonium for at least the next 15 years, and Iran declares a longer period of intent. Iran's total stockpile of enriched uranium, which today is equivalent to almost 12,000 kilograms of UF6, will be capped at just 300 kilograms for the next 15 years, an essential component of expanding our breakout time. 2/3 of Iran's centrifuges will be removed from nuclear facilities, along with the infrastructure that supports them. And once they're removed, the centrifuges will be, and the infrastructure, by the way, will be locked away and under around-the-clock monitoring by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Uranium enrichment at Natanz will be scaled down significantly. For the next 15 years, no uranium will be enriched beyond 3.67%. To put that in context, this is a level that is appropriate for civilian nuclear power and research, but well below anything that could be used possibly for a weapon. For the next 10 years, Iran has agreed to only use its first-generation centrifuges in order to enrich uranium. Iran has further agreed to disconnect nearly all of its advanced centrifuges, and those that remain installed will be part of a constrained and closely monitored R&D program, and none will be used to produce enriched uranium. Iran has also agreed to stop enriching uranium at its Fordow facility for the next 15 years. It will not even use or store fissile material on the site during that time. Instead, Fordow will be transformed into a nuclear physics and technology research center. It will be used, for example, to produce isotopes for cancer treatment, and it will be subject to daily inspection. And it will have other nations working in unison with the Iranians within that technology center. So when this deal is implemented, the two uranium paths Iran has towards fissile material for a weapon will be closed off. The same is true for the plutonium path. We have agreed Iran's heavy water reactor at Arak will be rebuilt based on a final design that the United States and international partners will approve, so that it will only be used for peaceful purposes. And Iran will not build a new heavy water reactor or reprocess fuel from its existing reactors for at least 15 years. But this agreement is not only about what happens to Iran's declared facilities. The deal we have reached also gives us the greatest assurance that we have had that Iran will not pursue a weapon covertly. Not only will inspectors be able to access Iran's declared facilities daily, but they will also have access to the entire supply chain that supports Iran's nuclear program, from start to finish, from uranium mines to centrifuge manufacturing and operation. So what this means is, in fact, that to be able to have a covert path, Iran would actually need far more than one covert facility. It would need an entire covert supply chain in order to feed into that site. And to ensure that that does not happen without our knowledge, under this deal, inspectors will be able to gain access to any location the IAEA and the majority
Mika,
of
Secretary of State John Kerry summing up some very tough outlines, guidelines for the development of Iran's nuclear weapons. Certainly, that's the message that both he and President Obama are trying to put forward this morning. What were your thoughts about what the Secretary said?
Well, he was very specific about exactly how this is going to work. A very stark contrast to critics that we brought on the show from Capitol Hill, Senator Tom Cotton, to be specific, who says it's a terrible deal and Iran will absolutely be able to get a nuclear weapon. It was a very different description from the architect of the deal, the Secretary of State. So it was kind of an interesting contrast to go from the president to Tom Cotton to John Kerry, the Secretary of State, who put the deal together. Let's go to Capitol.
I think, Mika, we're going to actually be hearing that debate. What we just heard, we're going to be hearing that probably over the next 60 days.
Exactly.
There's going to be a lot of back and forth, and what we're going to be seeing, because we've seen it already, there's going to be this shakedown period where our leaders are going to say it's a great deal for us. The Iranian leaders are going to come out and say it's a great deal for them and talk about how the United States capitulated. There's going to be a lot of debate over the next week or so. But regardless of how that shakes out, Mika, I'm curious what Mike Barnacle thinks. Obviously, Mike's known John Kerry for a very long time and has stayed in close contact with the Secretary of State through this entire process. Mike, obviously, this morning, a very big morning for the Secretary of State and something that he has been working for a very long time.
A very long time, Joe, and this is the job that, other than the presidency, he has always sought. He has it. He has worked tirelessly, both here in this country and around the region in the Middle East, and certainly in these talks for many, many days, many, many hours. And I'm sure what's going through his mind this morning is off of what Mika just indicated, and Senator Cotton was on here articulating his position, which I assume is going to be the position of most of the Republicans in the Senate, and I think Senator Kerry almost certainly is wondering, how can you jump into the opposition so firmly, so strongly right now when you don't even know yet the details of this deal, which he will explain as he's explaining now, and it'll be explained to us and the rest of the country in the ensuing 2 months. It'll be a real educational process that the president and the Republicans and the Democrats in the Senate engage in. It'll be really enlightening.
But I might have to jump in and say Tom Cotton wasn't given an opportunity to be as specific as he's able to be. He's very knowledgeable about this, and people that are knowledgeable understand that we did not get unfettered inspections of the military sites. So it doesn't take an education process for people that were following this. We didn't get that. You were talking about skeptical Democrats. But you know, for the president to come out this morning and say it was this deal or war is political, and he has skeptics in his own party. It is completely disrespectful to not take the time to explain to people before you call out your skeptics as warmongers.
Well, again, once more, using the president's exact language. He didn't say it's war. What he said was no deal.
I wrote it down too. No
deal means a greater chance of more war in the Middle East. I mean, that's a factual statement.
Well, the Iranians are engaged in 4 hot wars in the Middle East now, and we just gave them access to nuclear programs.
Well, and a bad deal dramatically increases the chance of a war in the Middle East, and that's why it's so important, I think, to understand the details of it. And this is not the first time we've heard the President of the United States, when speaking about this region of the world, come out with strong, emphatic statements that are delusional and completely detached from reality, whether it be concerning Iraq or Iran or ISIS. And so the
Complete
details
misunderstanding
of
of the Middle
this
East.
agreement are fundamental.
So let's go
No
to
doubt.
Capitol Hill and get some assessment of this from a professor of diplomacy and international relations at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, who led the Bush administration's effort toward dealing with Iran, former Ambassador Nick Burns. Nick, is this a terrible deal?
I think it's a complicated deal. It's a difficult series of trade-offs. I can clearly see the benefit, and by the way, I think it's sensible for us to go forward with it. We can freeze Iran's nuclear program in all due respects for 10 to 15 years, but there's some compromises here. The managed access to Iranian nuclear facilities is going to be a problem, I think. Can we reimpose sanctions easily against the Iranians should they transgress? And I think they're going to try to cheat. So this is the real world. And I think President Obama has made a difficult decision here. I happen to think it's the right decision because I do think if the Iranians cheat, if the deal falls apart, we're always the stronger party. We could use and threaten military force in extremis if we had to. The other problem is, I think a lot of the critics here, and I think it would be good if they read the 80 pages before denouncing it first, they've got to look at the alternatives here. If we had walked away, and this is the attack on President Obama, that he should have walked away, we would have lost the sanctions regime. The international sanctions would have frayed. The unity that we've got right now on our side, I think, would have dissipated, and Iran would be unfettered. They'd be able to rebuild the nuclear program. So on balance, this is a sensible approach, but it does have difficulties. And Mika, the last thing I'd say is, big moment for the Obama presidency. This is a foreign policy issue that has always captivated the president, and I think for Secretary Kerry as well. So I think their reputations and I think the success or failure of their foreign policy in many ways will be defined by this issue.
I am very excited to go to Jamie because when we had the 4-box, he was actually covering his eyes in absolute disgust and horror. But before we do that, we like you being expressive, Jamie. That was very good. I've got to say, Mr. Ambassador, just for our viewers that don't know that, you actually, under Secretary of State, under Condi Rice, you were actually responsible for looking into the possibility of these sort of negotiations in 2010, and you've commented before about how there was just nowhere to go. It's been a pretty extraordinary decade of movement, hasn't it?
It has. You know, people forget that the Bush administration offered to negotiate with Iran in 2006 and 2007. The Iranians turned us down. That's when we turned to sanctions. And we passed 3 Security Council sanctions resolutions against the Iranians. But we had the support of the Europeans, the Russians, and the Chinese. And I think that's what's so important here for President Obama. He has the world with him. He's been able to effectively intimidate the Iranians through these tough sanctions. And I think for the critics, they have to answer the question, okay, what's the alternative to this deal? Would walking away be better? Would using military force right now be better? I happen to think it wouldn't be. And so I see the difficult compromises. I'm worried about the inspections regime. This is far from perfect, but you have to live in the real world. And the real world, to me, says follow this deal, try to implement it, be very tough-nosed in confronting the Iranians when inevitably they try to cheat.
Jamie, anytime you undertake, and you know this very well from your work at the State Department, anytime you undertake a deal this significant, you take the same risks that Reagan took in the late 80s with the Soviet Union and those arms deals as well. What are the risks inherent in this deal, and how do you weigh them against the possible rewards?
Well, I think you're right to bring up the SALT agreements and the START agreements and arms control with the Soviet Union, because I think there really is an important analogy here, and that is that all the critics, Senator Cotton, and all of the critics that are likely to come out in the Republican Party in the Congress are correctly, in their view, regarding Iran as the adversary, the enemy, just the way we regarded the Soviet Union as the adversary and the enemy. And so what arms control